Welcome back, everybody. It's the October 14th AI update.
And I just want to start. I mean, the technology itself is rapidly advancing. We've seen a couple things. This is Jack Clark posted a Substack. He's the one of the co-founders of Anthropic and in charge of their policy. He's saying, like, right in the thing, that technology optimists expect AGI is something you can build. I'm a technology optimist. It's going to cover a lot of ground very quickly. And he kind of describes, right, there's a lot of nuance now in terms of kind of self-improving AI. It's not just fully autonomously creating more AI advances on its own, but it's making substantial contributions. And, he's an insider, right? Like, they're starting to see that. And this isn't like kind of a that much of a minority opinion. And other people, if you watch the Peter Demandis podcast with the other great guests he has on this, and they're all saying, like, hey, there's a lot of labor being done by robots. We're going to start seeing robots building robot factories, which are building more robots, and they're kind of saying we're starting to enter the hyper-exponential, the singularity, which is really kind of just when we become unpredictable because it's building its own. And, they kind of quote unquote feel the AGI or the ASI, right? They're really starting to see these rapid advances.
What's critical about this is that pretty much any of the insiders that we're hearing from, and I heard another podcast with Mark Zuckerberg today, the same point. It's about self-recursive and self-improvement. And once you get to that point, then you see that exponential increase in terms of capabilities, because then you can throw more compute at it and you can do a lot more than human engineers would be able to do. And here's a continuation from another one of the Moonshot podcasts, talking about how fast things are moving. And I remember listening to this, and it was pretty stark, talking about with early days of what they refer to as Singularity University, content was changing 20% a quarter on average. And that was very rapid change. And then they referenced that it's like 80% of change a week right now. It's just a totally different level. And we're certainly feeling it too. Every week we think that maybe it'll slow down a little bit. And we are constantly trying to figure out how can we cover everything that's happened in the last week, because there's so much happening all at once.
And I just want to highlight here on that last slide, on and joke kind of before the podcast when we were talking. We were both debaters, and I'm still coaching debate, and on coaching his kids. This is what we call a debate card. We used to put them on note cards, but we kind of copy and paste the text, or in this case of the transcript, and highlight the key parts. So if you were wondering what a debate card is, now you know.
Yeah.
Bonus podcast. That was free. All right. We're starting. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, continue on with data centers. They're continuing to make big deals, especially Sam Altman and OpenAI. Major announcement, a partnership with Broadcom to design and develop their own chips, and not just the chips, but the entire stack infrastructure. And they're planning on building out another 10 gigawatts. And ultimately, with all of this, is in addition to the other deals that he's made with AMD, with NVIDIA. And once they get all of them together, they'll have a roughly 30 gigawatts. And it'll take a number of years to get to that point. Currently, they have 2 gigawatts of compute power. And look at what they're able to do. If they're able to get to 30, the plan is they'll be able to provide that much more service and do that much more compute for ostensibly really great things, and maybe even scientific breakthroughs. But as we'll get to a little bit later in this episode, maybe other things that maybe we shouldn't be as worried about offering compute for, like erotica or AI slop that people are concerned about.
Yeah, the one other thing I just want to highlight here real quickly is where it says, like, in the third, like, quote unquote paragraph, under the terms of the deal, OpenAI will lead the chip design, embedding insights from its powerful models directly into the hardware. So this is an instance, we talked about, like, AI kind of building AI, not building it explicitly, but it's making a big contribution there. And I've seen other articles talk about this. The AIs are starting to make improvements in how the chips are designed. So you have AI kind of designing the chips, and Broadcom helping kind of build out the infrastructure.
Now, moving on to Agentic AI and a couple of quick developments. And the first is from Amazon, looking at their launch of AgentCore, a platform for running AI agents, running through AWS, allowing for lots of different web apps, API integrations, built-in storage through CloudWatch, continuing to see this development across the industry with really every player. And then also related to this is Walmart's announcement that they're partnering with OpenAI to introduce agentic commerce to ChatGPT. And this is continuation of something we talked about last week, where OpenAI wants to make sure that you can make those purchases without leaving ChatGPT. Walmart now is going to be jumping in on this as well.
And we're starting to see the development of, synthetic realities, right? And we talked about this a little bit last week with Sora, but we're kind of now really kind of stepping on the gas, really hitting the accelerator. And I kind of wanted to preview, I put this slide in here right at the top, even though it's not directly relevant to synthetic AI, but OpenAI has started an expert council on well-being in AI. So, it's like, obviously there's a lot, just going on, with the character AI and, the suicides and all these kind of things, but they're building synthetic realities and it's coming from other companies as well. And they want to think about, well, what's it going to be like to kind of be in that world? And they did point out that they hired a number of experts, which I think is important, but obviously experts are kind of bringing ideas, right? We haven't had full synthetic worlds yet. These are our first synthetic world. So I'm glad they have experts. They have expertise in psychology and a lot of things. But there's a whole new world that we're entering. And this is just kind of a simple thing, right? Like another image generator, right? That Microsoft's released, and it's one of the top 10. It's not even the best, but you can see it's really kind of photorealistic and kind of this image and videos. These are laying the foundation for the synthetic worlds. And kind of most provocatively, I saw this pop out today. Sam Altman says ChatGPT will soon sext with verified adults. And I saw this earlier, and I thought, oh my God, like this, this everything's going to unravel immediately. But then I realized, no, it's not till December. They're going to roll this out in December once they have age verification kind of in place because they say it's going to be hard, but they don't want kids under 18. They're so kind, sexting, but
And
you
it's
know,
also in response to the California law that's going to go into
right.
effect. So they have to get age verification in place. It's honestly kind of difficult to take this too seriously. I mean, why would they be concerned with bringing erotica to ChatGPT? It was mentioned in a tweet from Sam Altman talking about this. Maybe they will roll out or roll back some of the guidelines or restrictions that would have prevented, more adult conversations on ChatGPT, and that might be okay, but that's not necessarily where a lot of us would like to see the compute going.
Yeah, yeah, and I think too, it's not going to stay limited to text. We see that you can generate videos with Sora, and you're going to be able to generate other kind of videos as well. And he said even a year ago, hey, we're going to have adult activities for adults. And in this kind of, I put this here. We talked about persuasion. I've done some research on persuasion. We both have. AIs are very, very persuasive. This was just an example of a study that showed it. Oh, it helped people. You could persuade people to reduce like their meat consumption, right? So it's like when people say, "Well, why did you put it in this section?" It's like, well, we're building synthetic realities, right? We can have these kind of synthetic, arguably inappropriate chats, these visual worlds, all this stuff's getting created, and then these AIs are going to be very persuasive, kind of inside these synthetic worlds.
And there's also the step of taking it outside of the synthetic world into the quote unquote real world where we're constructing reality through persuasive dialogues with AI bots. And that line is going to start to blur where it's no longer separate. And this also feeds into the concern about mental health. It's not just a separate environment of a synthetic reality. If we start to see that interaction blurring between the two and the real world is really just representative of what might be going on in the synthetic world, I think that raises a lot of other really important questions about mental health and that interaction. And that's probably gets back to that initial point that Stefan put under this section, and that is the Council for Wellbeing to start to negotiate in some of this and to try to anticipate what is this going to do for interpersonal relations.
And another part of these synthetic realities, right? I mean, you can view the down. I think most people view the sexting is the downside. But there's also there's a lot of articles, and you can see the videos, a lot of kind of really racist, images that we're seeing on Sora. Some of this from an article in the Guardian. The Charlottesville rally showed a black protester in a gas mask, helmet, and goggles, yelling, "You will not replace us," which is a white, supremacist slogan that the whites aren't going to be replaced by the minorities. I saw a Sora video myself that showed a bunch of black people in the British Parliament, doing things that obviously you would not do in the Parliament building. Incredibly the racism, the misogyny, all kind of in these synthetic realities that are kind of becoming, like we say, hyper persuasive.
Yeah.
And part of this kind of reminded me of a quote. And let me just introduce it, briefly for a second. So there's also this Mark Cuban who has this drug company, low cost drugs, I think it's called. You can generate a Mark Cuban, and when you have that as like, a lot of people use Sam Altman. I did the hey, take a walk on the wall with Sam Altman. If you generate the Mark Cuban at the end of it, it has an ad for his drug company. So they're saying, okay, well, you'll be able to, make an image of Anand, and they'll show you an ad to attend the University of Mary Washington, right? And these things seem kind of harmless, but then you know Yuval Noah Harari, who's written about this, and I remember kind of reading some of his earlier work and listening on podcasts. He said the connection, right, the strongest kind of form of connection or persuasion can be intimacy, and you can define that in different ways, physical intimacy, but you can also just kind of define it as have a close relationship with somebody, and that's how you can really be persuaded. And we're starting, to see, these synthetic realities. I don't want to repeat all that again, but now they're becoming very persuasive, and we're going to see ads, right, for okay, this inappropriate synthetic reality, and then hey, you can buy this, thing at Walmart, probably not at Walmart, or some other type of shop, right? You could also vote for this candidate. Here's a bunch of kind of imagery that we used to see this, right, like in these anti kind of immigrant, videos that show all these immigrants kind of running over things, stealing things, right? They kind of doctor the videos, I believe, in kind of ways that were inappropriate, but now they can all be synthetically generated, which will be followed by, oh, go vote for X candidate. So you were just talking about how this is going to have real world consequences, and this is all starting to come together in very dangerous ways.
And it really blurs the line so that when we saw propaganda before, we might have been able to identify it as propaganda.
Right.
When we start to become desensitized to synthetic realities or synthetic representations, it'll be more difficult. And certainly that's an extension of, identifying deepfakes. It's also about identifying when something is tethered in reality and when it's not. And I think we're going to have a real difficulty, all of us, not just our students, but all of us, trying to manage that connection to reality and what will reality be, not just within synthetic environments, but also in the real world if we're interacting with synthetic entities and being persuaded by AI bots that are faking intimacy. And so it's pretty chilling. And the real concern, I don't think a council for well-being is going to be enough to be able to counter any of this. Now, this is something we referenced before, and this is the California law that has just recently passed, and the first time that we have age verification that'll be required. And this is something that'll take place in California. But of course, California in the past has also led a lot of other legislation that then ends up effectively being in effect across the country, because any of these companies are going to want to make sure they have a market in California, as well as many of them are based in California. That age verification and the warning labels, the age verification will lead to other potential changes, because if you have age verification, you can identify that somebody is above the age of 18, that they might have access to different kinds of tools or interactions, as we talked about before. But this is something, this SB 243 is certainly a step in the right direction. It's important that they offer some kinds of protocols to have a better chance of limiting access for students, and especially if they can identify for minors for mental health concerns. And as we're talking about synthetic realities, I think there are going to be a lot of other aspects of this that we need to be concerned about for people under the age of 18, and probably for those of us above 18 as well.
Then of course, we always cover, some effects on the economy. There's probably two big things that people are talking about, right? One is almost all the investment that venture capital, bank loans, like any kind of thing you would define broadly as an investment. Almost all the money is going into AI right now. So there's people talking about, well, what does that mean for other parts of the economy? And then other people say, well, hey, if it can't sustain these values, right? And people talk about a bubble, it's not all going to go away. But even if it can't kind of sustain all the values, well, what happens to the rest of our economy, right? That's struggling in other ways for a variety of reasons. So if it's not sustained, we could have even more troubles than we have now.
Yeah.
And then the second thing, people are always talking about jobs, and Eric Ben Jolson, at the Stanford Digital Academy Economy Lab, he's one of the leaders in this. He just kind of shared something, AI in the labor markets, what we know and don't know, which is written by one of the postdocs that he works with. And, I'm not going to read all these out loud, but basically saying, okay, we're starting to see some impact on the exposed, professions, but not a lot, right? But more could definitely come, and we don't have a lot of data from other countries, And it is worth saying at the beginning we talked about how rapidly the capabilities are expanding. They're not just going to automatically diffuse into the economy, right? There's this whole debate about how long it'll take to diffuse, but it's certainly going to diffuse faster than a lot of other technologies, and a lot of people are saying it'll probably present a lot of employment challenges.
Now, when we move on to sovereign AIs, we've talked a bit about before, and geopolitical repercussions and concerns. This story was one that was yeah, pretty jarring. I was surprised to see this, that the Dutch government took control of a European chip manufacturer that was tied to a Chinese company, and there have been a number of questions about access to proprietary information and whether or not that was something that was going to be taken back to Chinese industry. And I guess that this takeover was the first time that the law that was passed in the 50s was actually implemented. And it actually took place in September, but it was just announced in the last week or so. And it's just contributing to West Chinese tech tensions, as we see with other stories, including the rare earth minerals restrictions, and the disruption and part of the continuation of the trade war or trade spat that's been going on. And we even saw this last Friday when part of that was announced from China. Then there was a retaliation from President Trump announcing 100% tariffs. Stock market started to drop very precipitously, very quickly. Some of that seemed to have gone back into, the market at least has bounced back. But there are real concerns about what this is going to look like, what it's going to mean for relations between China, the US, and China and Europe.
And then there's kind of more ethics. We kind of alluded to kind of some of the ethical issues with synthetic realities. But somebody just wrote a book called Gilded Age. Elon Musk and the radicalization of Silicon Valley, which kind of looks at kind of some of the founding in that. But I read an interesting article on Politico about this, and it kind of really says that the only there's probably just one real form of moral guidance, and that's kind of the obligation to the shareholders, right? If you have a corporation, you have an obligation to your shareholders to make as much money as possible, and I guess you can use that for your moral or legal justification, but also people just want to make as much money, right? So when you say, okay, well, is it really appropriate to have these kind of services that we talked about, these kind of synthetic realities? Say, well, we have to make money for our shareholders, so we're acting in a morally correct way. And then there's a lot of the leaders they don't necessarily favor democracy, right? They're uncertain as to whether democracy is the best form of government, right? And we've talked about other challenges. We haven't really on the podcast, but other people, I should say, are talking about other democratic challenges. President Obama just said that even in countries that we assumed were democratically stable, maybe that's not the case anymore. But some of the leaders in this are really just concerned with making a profit and maybe even kind of supporting other forms of governance.
Now, a quick update in terms of robotics. This is a story that Stefan shared with me, and pretty telling. And he's been talking a bit about this on previous updates, and we've mentioned this, just how far ahead China is in terms of robotics. Stefan, what else does the article have to say?
It's just saying that, that when Western executives go to China, they're just so surprised by not only the advances in robotics, and we have a lot of good advances in robotics in the US too, even though China may be marginally ahead, but just kind of the scale, right? That they're able to produce thousands and thousands of robots, that they have factories that are primarily being run, by robots. And it's kind of shocking to them, in the sense that, like, wow, they can really do this. And I don't think a lot of people in the US have a very good understanding of China and kind of their industrial capacity and their work ethic, right? Like, you just hear politicians calling them communists, and they make it sound like everyone's lazy because they get like really cheap healthcare, but they're incredibly hardworking people, really kind of advanced, academically, especially in STEM and mathematics, and kind of have the ability to scale all this technology into the companies. And I think the B The second reason they're kind of shocked and a little bit concerned is like it's kind of hard to compete with a company whose most of their product is being made by robots that you don't have to pay, right? Like, sure, there's costs of kind of developing these and kind of running the factories, but they pale in comparison to the costs of producing products with humans, right? In traditional manufacturing. So I'm sure they're wondering like how in a globalized market, assuming we can retain at least some of that, how they're possibly going to be able to compete with a lot of products.
And it's only at the beginning of this. I mean, I think you're going to see a lot more of it, especially as there's a hope or a suggested hope that we're going to bring manufacturing back to the United States. There's no way that we'd be able to compete with US wages against robotic personnel or labor in another country. Now, as far as research, a couple of quick updates regarding this. And Stefan, I'll let you start with this one.
There's been a lot just about kind of scientists, AI scientists, and there's still really kind of co-scientists. But we saw another paper, just kind of from yesterday, released on ArcSiv about an SR scientist that's, able to kind of, what does it say? Write code to analyze data in a study, right? Implements the equation as code, submits it for evaluation, optimizes it, the feedback. So it's able to do like a lot of the data analysis and kind of confirm results of studies, and it does kind of outperform other baseline methods of kind of doing the same thing. So we're starting to see, again, it's not like there's just an AI scientist going out there and doing things, but they're able to perform essential parts of the scientific process.
Another development that Stefan just shared with me earlier today was this report coming out about Chinese researchers. Typically, when you think about one large language model interacting with another, they're sharing text in the way that a human might with another human. You send a text to somebody, you write text. In this case, they're able to share meaning through internal memory. So it's kind of like instead of reading a paper that Stefan wrote, I could just I'm kind of connected with his hard drive, and I'm able to just read the hard drive without even really reading it, just accessing it and being able to use that content. So this, in terms, it's just an incremental change, but it certainly speeds up how quickly they're able to interact. And through that shared meaning, there's a lot more that can happen, and certainly miles ahead of where we were with just kind of RAG systems where it's just pulling in text or constantly referring to text. If you have all large language models, especially in the agentic workflow, that are able to share internal memory, then they're going to be able to do a lot more. So it's what we're seeing here is that even without the big changes in terms of like a new frontier model, there are lots of incremental changes that allow for different architectures, that allow for different model methods to be able to access and be able to work together. And when you get that into an agentic workflow, every little efficiency just compounds on the others, and it radically increases the efficiency as well as the capabilities of those agentic systems.
And just we're mostly talking about universities, but there's a new report out, K-12, which is it's really talking about how much. There's a couple components. One is what AI systems are K-12 schools using, and we get a lot of 10% are using Magic School, 5 almost 6% ChatGPT, some Briz, some Gemini. Surprised not more Gemini since it's free, but just kind of really came out for schools late. So, that's kind of one, I say that's like one component of schools, right? Using AI, okay, getting some familiarity with the tools. But, then it talks about other things that kind of a little scarier, right? Like, I mean, you're basically 20 some percent using, 25% using the tools, right? But they're, most just have a pilot program. They don't really have much of a policy. They don't all have a committee, which might be okay. Many committees are kind of slow, but they don't have any implementation strategies. The thing that scared me the most is 63.5% have zero board meeting engagement on AI. And the reason I think that's scary is because people are not realizing the significance of AI. You don't need board. I don't think you need board level engagement on whether you purchase Magic School or some other AI tool that is kind of similar to purchasing some other tech product. But whether you're going to have courses that help students understand the world that's unfolding around them, to help them kind of manage or think about these synthetic realities. I'm not talking about having all the answers, but just kind of building awareness, whether you're going to have courses like applied AI so kids can actually be prepared, so you can maybe give them some guidance on what types of colleges they want to choose. So you can have some instructional redesign. So everyone's just, no offense to the papers, not like kind of constantly writing papers, but doing things like interdisciplinary learning, classroom debates, the stuff we talk about all the time, this stuff everyone argues is essential. Those are major curriculum changes that are going to become essential if schools want to survive more than like the next couple of years and still be relevant. And boards are not engaging that, I think, because people don't see the significance of it. So much of the conversation in schools is still about 2023 chatbots and where they fit on the traffic light system. It's basically irrelevant at this point.
I mean, far beyond, even way from before you get to the point where you're talking about curricular changes. The fact that two-thirds are really not even engaging about AI when 84%, according to the study we were talking about last week, of students are using it for their schoolwork. At the very least, there needs to be an awareness that students are using it. And if they aren't giving that guidance, they're really doing a disservice to the students, even in just initially recognizing the use and trying to offer better guidelines and responsible use. They're woefully ill prepared, and it's really scary to think about how are they going to be able to recalibrate. I mean, we're finally at a stage where there seems to be more awareness and more discussion about it in pop culture, but obviously schools have a long way to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's like they're kind of totally lost. I mean, not just control. Control may not be good, but influence over how learning is happening in their school. There may be more learning with AI systems than happening in the classroom.
Yep.
Uh,
Now we want to talk a bit about consciousness and a little bit more. I think we've talked about this a bit in some recent updates, but as Stefan was noting, there just more and more people are talking about it. And I think if you go back to some of the references that we had at the beginning from the Moonshot podcast, for instance, there's a lot of awareness that it seems like we're at the edge of something, or at the precipice of some real change coming forward.
And this is a quote, Jack. I forget the last name, but the person who's the co-founder of Anthropic says, right, we're dealing with a real and mysterious creature, not a simple predictable machine. And the other big point he makes here is like you need to accept this reality, right? And not necessarily. I don't think you have to accept that it's conscious, and I don't think he's saying that, but he's saying you have to accept the reality. This is a very significant technology, and it's a very new and different type of kind of interactive technology. And he's talking about its situational awareness, right? Like how it understands the situation it's in and what's going on around it has really changed. And on the next screen, you can see that, or maybe there wasn't on the next screen, but he kind of in the rest of the article, he gives an example of a hammer. And it's like, oh, well, this hammer, it's like, being like, it's being used to like hit a nail. And then one day it's like, oh, I'm a hammer, right? So, and he's kind of suggesting that maybe these things are becoming self-aware. And it is interesting that, he's a co-founder of Anthropic, because even like 4 or 5 months ago, they started kind of a small research division in Anthropic to think about AI consciousness. And all those people were saying, hey, we're not arguing the machines are conscious. I suppose it's possible that they are, but it's very possible that they could become conscious, which is maybe what he's alluding to here. And even people who don't really think they're conscious are saying, like Mustafa Suleiman, are saying they're seemingly conscious, right? So, and if you tie this back into the synthetic realities, we have interact with kind of visualizations, interact with text, maybe in not the most appropriate way, and entities that we probably at least think are conscious.
Even if they're not, that
Right.
concern is that it really feeds into everything we were talking about before. And that's where you don't have to be a techno optimist or assume that it's going to go that far. But there's certainly moments with anybody that's interacting with an advanced chatbot that you see glimmers of something. And for somebody that doesn't have their guard up, isn't really thinking about it critically, it'd be very easy to think that this is conscious, that it really is something that is sentient in some level. And that just opens up another door to all kinds of really dangerous possibilities. Now, the last section, we want to talk about kind of the next horizon and what else is coming.
So just quickly, some people are saying Gemini Pro is going to be out soon. I think they're saying the 20th, 23rd, something like that. I was looking as I'll be traveling the front end of next week, as you know, and it looks pretty impressive from the leaks that are coming out. And they're just leaks because they're saying in the AI studio, when you kind of enter a prompt, basically it's giving you two answers, and one of them they think is Gemini 3.0.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, tomorrow morning, we didn't have time to cover this. It's almost morning now in the UK, but I guess Oxford University Press is releasing a survey of 13 to 18-year-old students in the UK from August about how they use AI. And Dan Fitzpatrick says, well, some of the stats are concerning and some of them show it's positive. I think we're definitely seeing both. But to your point earlier, I don't know what percentage they'll show. I mostly see pretty high percentages at this point, 80, 90 plus percent of kids are using AI in their schoolwork. If I ask 10 kids, at least I've only once had a kid say no. I think it's probably even well over 90% are using it. And like you said, like, where 30% of schools are maybe doing something right at this point.
Always a lot changing. Next week, we'll talk more about this Oxford University Press survey that's come out probably by the time this has been released. And certainly we'll be looking at some of these same issues going forward. Thanks, Stefan. Look forward to seeing the next discussion.
Yeah, thanks. It's great as always. You can tell I'm starting to get a little passionate about this kind of lack of awareness we're seeing here. All right, sounds good.
See you. Bye.
Bye.